Welcome, dear listeners. I am Dr. Sinister, your guide through the shadows, and tonight I invite you to listen closely to a tale of greed, terror, and the unforgiving sea. We follow the ruthless Captain Bolo and his crew of daring pirates as they seize upon a strange, silent cargo ship drifting alone in the fog. But as they board, a creeping unease fills the air, for there are whispers that some treasures come at a terrible price. Prepare yourselves for a journey into the dark unknown, where the line between legend and reality vanishes beneath the waves, in a pirate's nightmare. The Indian Ocean lay still, blanketed in a thick, unnerving fog that swallowed sound and light alike. It was the kind of night that seemed to suck the warmth from the air, replacing it with a chill that crept down to the bone. Bolo sat at the edge of his small skiff, his hardened eyes fixed on the faint green blip on their radar screen. He had been staring at it for nearly an hour now, watching as it hovered in the same position, its static presence the only movement in a sea of gray. A cargo ship. For most, the sight of such a ship might mean little. But for Bolo, a man who had spent his life pillaging the waters off Somalia, it was a beacon of fortune. A cargo ship of this size meant riches, more than enough to set him and his crew up for life. His mouth twisted into a cold smile as he thought of the wealth that could lie within. But something was off. The cargo ship sat motionless, and for nearly an hour he had seen no movement on board. No running lights, no noise, just the eerie, silent shape looming in the mist. Around him, his men waited in tense silence, their bodies taut with a mix of greed and dread. These men were seasoned pirates, hardened by years of bloodshed and survival. But tonight, an unusual quiet had fallen over them. Even Hakim, who usually filled the silence with boasts of future victories, was silent, his gaze fixed warily on the ship. "Boss, it's too quiet," Hakim finally muttered, breaking the silence. "It's like there's nobody there." Bolo shot him a dark look. "If it's abandoned, then it's easier for us. We take what's ours and get out." He spat into the sea, his impatience simmering. "Or do you want to turn back and miss the biggest prize of your life?" The crew said nothing, silenced by the promise of wealth. They had come too far to let fear take hold now. They steeled themselves as they maneuvered closer to the massive vessel. Soon, the hulking silhouette of the cargo ship loomed before them, its dark shape barely visible against the thick fog that clung to the ocean. "Ropes out," Bolo commanded, his voice steady. "We're boarding." With the efficiency of years, the crew secured their boat to the side of the cargo ship and began climbing up, one by one, until they all stood on the deck. The air on board was stifling, thick with an odd stale smell that reminded Bolo of salt and rot. He shook off his unease, his mind set on the treasure he knew must be hidden within. They moved forward, slipping through the dark corridors with their weapons drawn, every footstep echoing in the oppressive silence. But as they passed room after room, an unsettling realization crept over them. There was no one here. The ship was completely deserted, as if it had been abandoned to drift alone in the sea. The silence felt wrong, unnatural even, as though the very walls were holding their breath. "This don't feel right, boss," Hakim murmured. It's like we're the only ones left in the world." "Then maybe we are." Bolo sneered, though his own voice sounded hollow. "You think a ship like this is going to scare me off? Keep moving." They continued, but as they went deeper, the atmosphere grew stranger. The air was heavy with an odd, stale smell, like something that had been sealed away for centuries. Eventually they reached an odd sight, a massive ancient wooden door, completely out of place among the ship's otherwise modern design. It looked as though it had been taken from another era, with cracks and splinters that spoke of ages past. Bolo's brow furrowed as he pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit cabin. Inside, the air was thick and stale, a heavy smell of salt and decay hanging in the air. At the center of the room sat a small desk, and atop it lay a weathered, leather-bound book. He picked it up, running his fingers over the rough, ancient cover. The date on the first page read 1776, scrawled in spidery ink, and every line of the logbook was filled with tales of storms, bloodshed, and the unrelenting pursuit of treasure. It also told of a legendary pirate who violently killed his entire crew after learning of their plans to kill him and take his loot. The name scrawled at the top of each page sent a chill down his spine. Barnabus Thorne. Bolo felt a strange unease prickling at his neck, but he forced it down, his ambition pushing him forward. "We came for treasure, not old stories," he muttered, tossing the book aside. Leaving the room, they pressed deeper into the ship until they came to a thick, steel door, locked tight with chains that were thick with rust. Bolo's lips curved into a cold smile as he motioned to his men. "Get the guns out, we're taking it down." The crew raised their weapons, unleashing a barrage of bullets that tore through the metal, the sound reverberating through the silent ship. The chains shattered, and with a creak, the door swung open, revealing a sight that made every breath in the room still. Gold, jewels, ancient artifacts gleamed in the faint light, piles of treasure that spilled across the floor, beckoning them with a siren's call. For a brief moment, the unease vanished, replaced by the thrill of triumph. They had done it. Laughter erupted as the men rushed forward, grabbing at the treasure, their hands filling with gold coins, necklaces, and gemstones. Hakim's face lit up as he held up a ruby-studded goblet. "We're rich, boys." But as their laughter filled the room, the ship began to shudder. The walls groaned, and the air grew colder, the smell of rot intensifying. The laughter died as they looked around, their hands freezing over the gold as the walls of the cargo hold began to change. The steel peeled back, giving way to rotting, decayed wood, and the clean lines of the modern ship transformed into the dark, moldy structure of an ancient vessel. The realization struck them like a thunderbolt. They were not on a cargo ship. The illusion had faded, revealing the cursed ship of Barnabus, Redbeard, Thorne. A low, malevolent laugh echoed through the room, filling the air with a cold, creeping dread. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, his face twisted into a wicked grin. He had a blazing red eye, an eye patch, and a long golden hook in place of his right hand. Redbeard. The crew's hands trembled as they raised their guns, their fingers pulling the triggers in desperate panic. Bullets tore through the air, but each one passed through Redbeard's flesh, their shots doing nothing but making his laughter grow louder, more mocking. "You think ye can kill me?" Redbeard sneered, his hook lifting as he advanced. "You'll be paying for your greed, fools." With terrifying speed, he lunged forward, his hook slashing through the first man in his path. Blood sprayed across the room, staining the treasure as the man's scream echoed in the silence. He crumpled to the floor, lifeless, his eyes staring into the void. Hakim turned to run, but the ship itself seemed to warp and twist, the hallways narrowing and closing around him. He barely had time to scream before Redbeard's hook tore through his chest, lifting him into the air before tossing him aside like a rag doll. The rest of the crew scattered, scrambling for any escape, but there was none. The ship had become a death trap, a twisted maze of decayed wood and shadow, with Redbeard stalking them like a predator in the dark. One by one, he hunted them down, his hooks slashing through flesh and bone, his laughter filling the air as he dragged them into the shadows. One man tried to hide, crouching behind a crate, but Redbeard's hook found him, piercing his skull and dragging him out, his body lifeless and bloody. Another pirate, young and desperate, unloaded his gun into Redbeard's chest, but the bullets did nothing. Redbeard grinned, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him high before driving his hook into the man's abdomen, ripping upward in a spray of blood. Bolo, the last to survive, stumbled onto the deck, his breath ragged, his body trembling with terror. He was alone, the screams of his crew fading into the silence. As he looked around, Redbeard emerged from the shadows, his hook dripping with the blood of Bolo's men, his eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. Bolo emptied the last of his ammo into Redbeard. Redbeard laughed, a loud, deep, boisterous laugh that shook the ocean itself, waves crashing against the bow. "You came for my treasure." Redbeard sneered, his voice a low, sinister growl. "But you'll be joining me, crew, this eve." With one swift, brutal motion, he drove his hook into Bolo's abdomen, lifting him into the air as his scream echoed across the deck. Blood poured from the wound, soaking his clothes. But Redbeard wasn't done. He dragged Bolo across the deck, his body scraping against the wood, leaving a crimson trail in his wake. With a final, triumphant laugh, Redbeard hurled Bolo overboard, casting him into the dark, icy waters of the Indian Ocean. As Bolo's vision dimmed, the last thing he saw was the cursed ship fading into the mist, Redbeard's laughter echoing long after it had disappeared. The ocean grew silent, and the cursed vessel drifted back into the fog, carrying with it the souls of those foolish enough to seek its treasure.